Hi, everyone. Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on Process Matters, the Nesting of Negotiation Theory with Relational IR with Dr. Nimet Berikar. Today's webinar is one of a series of monthly webinars led by the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. My name is David Taylor Tumulty. I'm an Assistant Director of Recruitment and Admissions here at the school, and I work with the MS program in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution. I'm joining today's webinar to help answer any questions that may come up in the Q&A box about the program or application process or anything that's admissions related. At the end of today's webinar, I'll be presenting a few short slides about our application process for those who may be interested. We will be recording today's webinar, and you will be able to review this along with previous recordings on the NECR website under the Previous Webinars tab. Following today's presentation, we will also open the conversation up to a live Q&A with our speaker. So please do feel free to utilize the Q&A box that you see towards the bottom of your screen. At this time, I'll hand it over to Dr. Beth Fisher-Yoshida, who will introduce today's guest, Dr. Nimet. Hi, Beth. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you, David. Yes, so I'm always excited about these webinars because there are people doing some wonderful things in the world related to negotiation and conflict resolution. And of course, I know Nimet for many years, but I heard her speaking this summer and I said, why aren't you doing a webinar with us? Because what you're talking about is so incredibly interesting, and thus we have today's webinar, which David mentioned the title of. Before we get into the webinar and I bring Nimet on board, I just wanted to share with everybody that on October 19th at Columbia University at the Casa Italiana, I and my colleague Joan Lopez will be doing a book launch for our new book, which is here. I just so happen to have it. And it is Peace Building in Colombia from the Lens of Community and Policy. So if you can be in New York City, you are in New York City and you're interested, please go to the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution website, which maybe David can share later at the end of the webinar. And to our events page, we have a link where you can register and get more information. So I've known Nimet, I said, for many years. Nimet has a very interesting project she's been working on and theory-based, really about the nesting of negotiation theory. And I think one of the points that attracted me to wanting Nimet to talk more about this is that, sometimes we isolate theory into separate categories when in actuality, if we think about it, theory can be integrated into so many different things we do. I know that I consider myself a scholar practitioner, and so for me, theory is important to inform my practice. And Nimet has a unique lens also about relational international relations, or IR. So without me talking about what Nimet's going to talk about, let's just let Nimet talk about what she's going to talk about. So I'll bring Nimet on board and I will join back later after her presentation. We encourage you to use the Q&A box to please think about questions and comments, and you can put those in the box at any point during the presentation and we'll come back to it later. So Nimet, please take it away.
Thank you, Beth, for the introduction. Can you hear my voice? Is everything fine?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great.
You might want to give a little bit more about your background that I did not do.
Okay. I've been, I'm a graduate of, from George Mason University ages ago. I hold a PhD from the Institute of Conflict Resolution. Now it is the Carter School. But later, my first job as a scholar was in a mainstream IR department. So that is maybe how I got into this topic a little bit. And then later, I had the opportunity to start a conflict resolution program and coordinate that program in Istanbul. A graduate program, actually. But I had, some other opportunities to be in the field, practice, train, be in touch with the real world. So I consider myself, a scholar practitioner as well. but I never stopped thinking about my background. Again, I worked with Daniel Druckmann, who's a social psychologist. My co-supervisor was Christopher Mitchell, an IR person and historian. So coming from this cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary background, I always thought about what the neighboring disciplines have to say to the puzzles that we are dealing with as conflict resolution scholars and practitioners. And this work is one of the products of those kinds of inquiries. This is a paper that I have been working lately, at least for the last 3 years. I thought it was a done deal. I sent it to a journal. I mean, they kindly said that it is not done yet. I had 7 pages of rejection. Yes, I survived that. But the feedback that I got was very interesting, and I also think that this opportunity for me to present this work is a great opportunity to look things again and reevaluate what I want to do with this project. So this is a heavy conceptual paper, which I hope I will not load you with a lot of jargon and concepts and abstract stuff. It is conceptual, but the puzzle, the main observation comes from the policy world. If you consider policy analysis as a practice, which to my taste is a practice, then the puzzle is from that world. So what is that observation that I had, which also led to this project? So what I realized is in the policy world, in dealing with important pressing issues such as, rising authoritarianism, climate crisis, democratic backsliding, those big issues, or polarization. So when you look at those kinds of reports produced from different think tanks, international organizations, you rarely see processes emphasized as one of the major factors that are incorporated within those analyses. So that was my observation as well, when I was working in a mainstream international relations department as well. So that is the one thing that made me think how this can be changed. Are there some analytical tools that can help looking at things from this processual perspective? So I thought behavioral negotiation framework is an interesting tool to explore. So that one goal is to explore this basic framework to see if it can work as a policy tool. The second goal related to that is to illustrate major insights that are discussed in relational IR, which is a recent trend in international relations, with reference to a more elaborated version of this main conceptual framework. So the observation, again, the reason I wanted to but use this upgraded framework in this context is that although this new strand has extremely interesting insights about how the world around us works, the discussions there are heavily based on social theory and philosophical ontologies. Therefore, it is a very abstract field, and those insights, I'm afraid, do not have a proper translations when it comes to produce hands-on knowledge that can be used to address those pressing issues. So those two came together, and then I started writing this paper. So one can ask why negotiation framework and why relational IR. So why these two are the main focus of this project. Number one, negotiation in the field of conflict resolution can be studied as an instrument of managing dispute, but it can also be treated as a microcosm of social international conflicts. So when we look at the genealogy of this particular research strand, we see that it is based on laboratory experiments, but then later it has been cross-fertilized with research in organizational studies and international relations and diplomacy. So the framework has a potential to go up and to see up and down on a scale basis, both micro, meso, and macro levels. On the IR front, for the traditional mainstream IR generally focuses its analysis on agent and structure issues. However, this recent approach has a brilliant insights about how we should take process as our main unit of analysis to understand the hyperconnected, globalized, constitutive international politics, where the demarcation line between micro and macro has been blurred and interactions among entities are multi-layered and dynamic. So this observation about the world is exactly, resonates in my mind about what's going on in the world as we speak now, today. We woke up with very frustrating news this morning. Anyhow, so that is more or less the basis of my effort of writing this paper. So it considered as a translation effort of what is being said in a neighboring discipline with the tools that we have in the field of conflict resolution. So that is the very basic effort here. When we talk about process, for the conflict resolution scholars, it is like a second skin to us, either in the scholarly world or practitioners world. I don't make that distinction very often because to me, they go hand in hand and they are very integrated with each other. So the social psychological processes, have been treated heavily in our field, interventions, engagements, escalations, you name it. Everything that we do are about processes. The same with negotiation research that emphasizes, turning points, tactics, strategies, threshold adjustments. They are all process-related concepts, issues. Is for engagements, pure practice. When we get into a conflict situation, as a practitioner, as a mediator, for example, so we are interested in emotional, cognitive, and perceptual processes of the actors, right? So we are interested in forms of actions, types of engagements, instruments of engagements. They are all about processes. So we are interested in the nature of interactions. Are they cooperative or competitive? On top of that, we are also interested in more complex transactional, bundles of interactions and complexities. So the field is very well equipped or overly sensitized about the importance of the process. But is it the same, or was it the same for mainstream political science and IR? Unfortunately, my a quick answer is no. In this field, there is an indirect emphasis on process variables. Generally, as I said before, the main emphasis is on actors, their interests, preferences, and values, and structures, institutions, norms, power structures, etc. Often, the processes are incorporated as property of agency in this field of study. Therefore, causing a lot of cacophony about what process is in IR. There are different explanation of this. Some say that there is a lack of distinction between action and interaction. So the conceptual formulation came rather late to this discipline. Some say the heavy influence of game traditions had that type of caused that type of an inclination. Classical game theory takes two major properties, agent and structure, although the repeated game tradition factored in process components. Of course, there are exceptions to these observations. Giddens' structuration theory is especially relevant to this presentation, because it denotes a circular relation between social structures and practices. Later, as we will visit the main assumptions of relational IR, we will see exactly the same assumption there as well. To sum up, policy analyses are mostly based on agent structure template, and the profit maximization risk analysis generally are accompanied to this. And generally, in formulating policies, related instruments are thought as practice-related when it comes to practice-related formulations. Now, therefore, I argue that processual analysis is still an undercurrent in mainstream IR, especially in the world of, as for its implications in the policy making. So what is this relational theory tells us? Very quickly, this is a very loaded actually realm. I don't want to be honest, it's not easy to grasp, but there are a lot of meta theories, meta conversations going on. As I said before, it is heavily based on political theory, and it belongs to a totally different ontology that we generally different ontology than objectivism, individualism, and rationalism. It is based on relationalism. But the importance, I think, of this trend is, again, they take processes as the major unit of analysis, and they say they are interested in mechanisms that, among other things, give rise to both actors and the environment. So it is like what comes first kind of a puzzle we have here. For them, the world is in the making. The interactions and motion is already there, and within that we act, and that is that comes first in helping to emerge new entities, new actors, new institutions, norms, etc. So some theoretical elements, therefore, are transactions, networks, fields, relations, and position. There are different strands within this umbrella name, a relational theory. So I just listed here but I will not get into them. But it would be nice to know that the continental approaches and Anglo-Saxon approaches to relational theory vary a little bit in terms of their assumptions and the way they interpret the theory itself. So within this, practice theory is particularly interested in non-static elements of the social world, and they consider practices as the doings of agents, but they move beyond that. They are also interested in the way how this complex transactional interactions lead to new emerging entities or some new forms of entities, new actors, again, new power structures, new institutions. What else? It's a flat ontology, by the way. They do not differentiate micro, meso, macro, the layers. In ontologically, what happens in micro, in their view, is relevant or has the same weight as what happens in macro. So it is a very interesting way of looking at things. So it's a flat ontology in their description. This strand is interested in negotiation research. Of course, their instruments to look at things are quite different than what we do, or at least what I do. It is interesting to read, but I should say that what they come up with, the substantial contribution is kind of, I shouldn't say basic, but it is, the accumulation of knowledge that we have in the field is way beyond when we compare the conversation that is going there. But the way they approach the things is totally different. So how am I doing with time? I don't know.
You can have a few more minutes, finish your slides, it's fine.
Just that. Okay. So I take this a negotiation framework, which is based on Sawyer and Gretzko 1965 framework, and then it is developed by Druckmann. So what I do basically here is to take this framework as the basic unit. It is interesting that you have here the preconditions, the nature of the issues that are on the table, the features of the parties, their motivational, psychological orientations, or cognitive and ideological backgrounds. And you have conditions here, situation and external factors. So these factors combined with actions and interactions of the parties lead to outcome. So what I do, I take this template in the paper, and I look at different features of this template, and I concluded that this is not only a linear temporal framework, because it has some feedback arrows, and the time element is embedded there, and it denotes multiple spatiotemporal orders and complex interacting negotiation structures. So what I do is basically, therefore, my first aim was to see whether this can be used in policy analysis in a more macro type of context. So what I say is that, yes, when you look at politics or political developments from this perspective, the nature of the issues, the nature of the parties, and the context factors, structural factors are there in any kind of social interaction, but the process part changes. So in negotiating a setting, the process part is made of negotiation tactics, right? However, when we take up scale up, for example, to domestic politics, the process part should be equipped or should contain different governance instruments, because the parties make moves and counter moves by using these instruments. And at international level, the instruments of statecraft are the basic instruments that are used to constitute that interactive interaction climate. So these are some examples of that. I have highlighted here contentious statecraft as well, because in many, when we talk about instrument of statecraft, we generally have the tendency of thinking of diplomacy. However, it can be both very competitive and cooperative at the same time. Again, what I did, I upgraded this negotiation framework according to the insights of this relational theory. I tried to incorporate commitment of relational approaches, depict the process as the key unit. I looked at the mechanisms of constitutions and unit formation, and I looked to the emergence of the new, the processes that lead to emergence of new norms, actors, and power configurations. So let me go very quickly through that without further, I will not get into the details of them. So I have simplified the previous framework, behavioral negotiation framework, into this. It's basically background factors, conditions, maybe I should add there, the properties of the actors, leading process and outcome. So this is the very basic construction. So I looked if I can, treat this in a temporal order. This is exactly the same framework, but on a vertical, I illustrated vertically. This is the background factors, processes, and outcome. And then you have some interactions through time. And let me go next. So with the use of that basic framework, I was able to see how finite negotiations and infinite negotiations could be formulated. Finite negotiations are the ones that takes place around a table with, specific issues, parties, and with a specific aim, goal. But here, consider, for example, a negotiation that takes place in a summit meeting, a face-to-face negotiation of Biden and Erdogan, for example, the Turkish president. And this RAM is the Turkish-US relations in general, and it is formulated as infinite negotiations. It's open-ended with no specific goals, and etc. Moreover, I further developed the basic framework. I added another recurrent process adjunct to the one that I have just shared with you. Here, I tried to show how recurrent use of processes constitute an interaction ecology, and how this interaction ecology feeds back the background factors if we take the time element into consideration. So this new condition here is not only the final affected by the outcome of the final interaction, but it's also fed by the international ecology that has been going on there. So that was an illustration that I thought kind of translates how the emergent emergent entities can be explained. And then this is a much more complex figure. It shows complex sets of configurations, this time by taking into consideration multiple spaces, micro, meso, and macro. So all these gray areas that you see are some transactional domains, different than simple interactions that we generally describe in our field. So with that note, I would like to conclude. So why this exercise, intellectual exercise? Again, those who are interested in composition of dynamic modular transactions, the gray arrows in my figures, you can ask what they are made of, what they do, and how they do what they do. So these are very interesting questions to me. I mean, they are not questions that, at least in my own, research or practice, are not the questions that I ask myself. So what those larger transactional, the dynamics that is out there is made of. So how, for example, the new properties, rhetoric, institutions, norms, power structures emerge. What are the mechanisms there? Could be another interesting question. Uncovering recursive loops that reinforce or discourage certain types of practice ecologies could be another interesting, question or focus. The beauty is in this approach, you can start this exercise at any level, either at from micro or meso, macro, it doesn't matter, given that the ontic value of each level of interaction in relational IR is the same. So more or less, this is what I say in this paper. I know it has been a very, rushed presentation, but I'll be very happy to answer if there are questions, and I'll be very happy to also share the paper for those who are interested on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Nimet. So I want to remind everybody, as Nimet just did, to please write your questions and comments into the Q&A box. And while we're giving you some time to do that, I have a couple of reflections and questions for Nimet myself. So a couple of words stood out to me because what I am attuned to as well. You mentioned relational, dynamic, temporal, process. Those are just some of the words that I was keyed into. And I have a question about how temporal relates to finite and infinite negotiations. So did you look at that relationship between temporal constraints, unlimited time? What is the timing aspect of this, and how does that relate to finite or infinite series of negotiations? Is that something that you looked at or can comment on?
So the time element in the finite and infinite negotiations is
how does the time element influence whether negotiations are considered finite or infinite?
Yeah. Well, in finite negotiations, generally it is they are compartmentalized settings. The time is set beforehand, and more or less parties know where the end, the starting, where to start and when to start and when to end. Of course, this can go on. I mean, that the NATO summit negotiation at NATO summit, the example that I have given, could go on in different venues and in different. But again, when it is finite, it denotes a compartmentalized setting. The other one is a nickname for, infinite negotiations, actually are another name for political interactions in general. They are there, open-ended, with multiple actors, and with no specific goal at the end. So it is a much more fuzzy environment. So it's called, like, I also refer to that level as US-Turkey general in relations in general. So the time element there becomes much more complicated. So it is virtually, it is an ongoing process, let me say, let me put it in that way. I'm not sure if it answers.
Yeah. And then as you're answering that, I'm thinking about that the temporal element is not always the same in micro, meso, and macro. So, and public and like formal and not formal, or public and non-public, right? There's so many other ways of slicing that, because what is public and macro may be more finite, but behind the scenes, informal, micro level, meso level negotiations could be taking place differently, with a different time span, different temporal scope. So I do have something else also you talked, so I was thinking about, I also work a lot with the micro, meso, macro. We do that in the program. People use that as an element of analysis to analyze at different levels and so on. So then what are your thoughts on the potential ripple effect of, regardless of where you intervene, it may have an impact somewhere else, and that may influence where people elect to intervene on which level, micro, meso, or macro. So what are your thoughts about the ripple effect or effects on other levels other than the one where you intervene actively?
Yeah, if I can go back, it's a very good question. If I go back to, for example, this slide, the ripple effect, or I think I use the word transfer, how it transfers into different levels. There are so the constant use of certain type of processes by the parties. I don't have a third party in my mind here while answering your question. Constant and continuous repetitive use of certain processes, either through a learning process or through path dependency, they tend to generate a similar processes in macro and micro. For example, what happens in Gaza, horrible. So we are hearing things at macro level, right? There is a war there, it's macro. But when you look at if we had a chance to look at what happens in Gaza Strip, it's at micro level, I would expect a lot of conflict and violence within, for example, within the households as well, So there is this tendency of feeding back and up and down. Once there's a nature of interaction, either at micro or macro, this has an ontological life to travel up and down. As a third party, as a conflict resolution, now I try to think as an intervener. With that knowledge in mind, maybe we should be more inclined to deal not with the issues or parties, but to focus on the problematic of how to change the processes that are going on there, knowing that they have, ontic power to generate some further new issues, actors, and power dynamics.
Thank you, Nimet. So we have a couple of questions from some of the audience members, and so I'll just read some of them, see how much time we have to answer them. So one person is, based on the framework shown, when I saw the conditions topics, it made me think about Israel-Gaza conflict. I heard a negotiation specialist saying that this negotiation is, in quote, a waste of time because there are too many parties involved. At the same time, seeing someone say that a conflict is a waste of time sounds strange, as if people are giving up easily. I'd love to hear how you would approach, big question here, the Israel-Gaza case. Is it a classic example of infinite negotiation? You don't have to solve the whole Israel-Gaza right now, Nina, but any reflections on how you think either a component of the analysis or approach might be helpful?
I'm trying to get to I'm a visual person, so if I have my little stuff here, I feel more comfortable in, pulling my thoughts together. That's a very good question. Of course, well, it is it's a deep-rooted conflict. It is intractable conflict, according to some. I don't like to use those words though, because it kind of imposes a certain view on the conflict. So the conditions there are awful. But it has been awful for a long time. It was a dormant conflict. It was a frozen conflict for a while. And for us, it was, there was a silence there and everything seemed okay. But we all know that it wasn't. So this is not about, again, I think just an analysis based on the actors, their values, their interests, their motivations, or just looking at, the issues, the nature of the issues, or by just looking at the world in general under, the conditions under which these things are happening. I don't think we will have any clear answer to the question of our participant. We need to look at the dynamical, interactive the processes, either simple processes of interactions or more complex of transactional kind of bundled of interactions, to see how the time element, when we incorporate the time element, the environment is being dominated by this very nasty, competitive, almost, very win-lose oriented behavior. My point is, we need to incorporate the analysis of the processes that brought us to this point. So again, very conceptual, but that's
it's interesting because timing is everything, and depending on the timing depends on the nature of the intervention and what kind of conversations are being had or what kind of actions are being taken. To a lesser degree, I also compare that to conflict in organizational context, is when you call in a third party, that if there's a certain timing when certain kinds of interventions are doable, And then if it goes on too long, it becomes more deeply embedded. Then the issues become more complex. The people who are involved, it's very similar to the situation we're looking at now with Israel and Gaza, Ukraine and Russia. The longer it goes on, the more complex it becomes, the harder it is to deal with. That unfortunately, too often we don't deal with things when they're more manageable, and we try to address them when they're less manageable and more protracted and complex, and it makes it that much harder. So we did have requests for your paper, but you already said you're going to provide that, so we'll take care of that after. In terms of type of negotiation, another question would be, what type of negotiation could be most appropriate for Russia versus Ukraine and Israel versus Hamas? I'm not sure what they mean by type of negotiation, if they mean like an approach, but that's just the way the question was framed.
Yeah, I will relate that question with your comment, Beth. I totally agree that there are certain stages of conflict that are more prone to intervene. At this stage of the conflict, the intervention maybe will be just to provide a ceasefire or some, hostage-related negotiations. That's a big maybe again, but if there are, I'm sure there are some actors trying to mediate that. I heard also the Turkish president is willing to do that. I'm not sure, or Qatar is in the picture. So that's the only tiny part of the issue of the big picture. There's no way the real issues can be addressed at this stage. So I second your observation. So what kind of negotiation? Again, it depends on the stage of the conflict. For in Ukraine. Again, maybe just a ceasefire for the first, as a first stage. And, it all depends on where we are in conflict, as you stated, and what are the issues in hand at that particular point in time. And what are the actors at that particular point in time. So this time element is quite important, but maybe if there are at a certain stage, it could even evolve, hopefully, into a more win-win collaborative negotiations. But we are not there at that stage in neither of these conflicts. So that's basically what I think.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to change topic a little bit. Somebody wrote, I briefly skimmed a New York Times article this morning that spoke of Kamala Harris's challenge in that she does not seem to think or act in what sounds like infinite terms, but is rooted in finite transactions. Interesting article in light of this conversation. Did you happen to read it? Any thoughts? So it's really, there has been recently some commentary on, of course, Biden running for re-election, seeking nomination for re-election, and then Kamala Harris as vice president. People are concerned about Biden's age, so they're taking more seriously Harris's potential as a president should anything happen to Biden if they were to get elected. So any thoughts on if she thinks in finite terms or infinite terms?
So I didn't read the article myself, so it's hard for me to comment what was the core of the argument there.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I would comment on this is, we only see the information that's presented to us about anybody's actions. I did hear, yes, President Biden speaking yesterday, I think, and he said something to the effect of, we can't say everything that we're doing, but we're doing something all the time, like all night long, 24/7, we're doing something. And I think people need to acknowledge that that is probably the case, that there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that is not shared with us for good reasons, that they shouldn't be shared, or whatever reasons, it's just not communicated. So we can't only assume that what we are seeing is what's actually being done. In terms of Vice President Harris's actions on things, we don't know what what area she's allowed to participate in or not participate in. We don't know the constraints on her, or if it's her setting her own constraints. So it's a little bit strange to comment on that when we don't really know except what we see.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it's a kind of a hybrid environment there. The attempts, it is, both peaceful attempts to tackle with some part of the issue, some immediate, pressing issues like hostages, ceasefire, I don't know. But at the same time, there are some other motivations of, retaliation or give a strong signal to Hamas. So that is also, is important when it comes to state relations. But my point is, what happens there, again, is not very independent from what happens in, for example, Israeli political landscape. The processes that at that level are related with this event, are also related with this event. For example, the fact that the army was not able to come right away. Okay, the intelligence was compromised. They say it is due to the army commanders are so annoyed with Netanyahu because his, in my terminology, his state, because the way he used governance instruments, he tried to change the constitution. The army commanders said, if you change this, and if we take action in the long run, we will be in trouble. We will go to a war tribunal, So the people say they were also not very, either ready or swift to respond things. So it all connects to each other. I'm not finger pointing or any, but everything is related with everything. So that kind of supports the insights of this relational approaches. But again, there is a need for a more concrete analytical instrument to be able to conduct this kind of analysis. Again, maybe, what I'm trying to do will help. It was an exercise that I was happy to be involved with in a way.
Well, you did talk about relational dynamics, and that we also look at systems in the program, and things don't happen in isolation. So when you start to look at things, sometimes events happen, actions happen, and we say, "Way, all of a sudden something happened," and then when we look, we start to see the connection with other situations there. And there are different times to have different kinds of conversations, and the conversations that we need to have today will be different than what we'll have next week, next month, or we should have had last year, for sure. So the person mentioned another follow-up to the Kamala Harris question, and when an interview asked her, "What is your vision for the country?" her response was, "You have to be more specific." So I'm not sure that's infinite or finite, but I would imagine that if you're asking, "What is your vision for the country?" it's like you could say one big overarching vision, or you can be specific about what portion of the population or what kinds of initiatives and so on. So I don't, do you have a comment on that?
I mean, this finite and infinite is infinite describes two different types of negotiations. So just based on Kamala Harris's answer, first we need to look, is there a negotiation there? So he's just declaring some ideas, I guess, without reading the article. But maybe the criticism is the fact that she's been a bit open-ended, not kind of firm. I mean, it's hard for me to sense again. But the terms finite and infinite are the terms used to describe negotiating settings. In the finite ones are the ones that generally we talked in the program, you know, an organizational conflict. Oh, let's get together. Let's meet in a room. Let's talk. They are face to face, and they are more or less conducted with specific parties. The terminology gets a bit confusing in infinite one because it's not anymore a negotiation, but because I use the behavioral negotiation framework, I use that term. Maybe it should be stated as political interactions, infinite political interactions. Again, you know, my assumption is that we can understand those interactions and exchanges with the help of negotiation framework, but there we are talking about something much more, it's, as you put it, it's an ongoing process. It is a complex domain, fuzzy domain, many interactions going on either around one issue or a couple of issues, or two actors, multiple actors. It is the politics, the landscape of politics in general. Of course, we can reduce them depending on, for example, in the presentation, I reduced this infinite part into US-Turkey relations. But within that interaction landscape, there are many other parties that, you know, have an impact to that relation. So more or less, that is how I use finite and infinite negotiations.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that. It's a reminder that one of the advantages of using different frameworks is that it gives us a different set of lenses from which to analyze and understand situations. Otherwise, we're always looking at things from the same perspective, and this way we have an opportunity to see it differently, which may lead to a different understanding and may lead to different choices in our interactions. So I know we are out of time now. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for participating. This will be available on the NECR website shortly. Shortly means not today, but shortly. And if you are interested in the program, please feel free to stay online after we leave, and David will be here to answer some questions about the program. So I thank you, Nimet.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.